happening. You're trying to figure out ultimately what is.
It's still a mystery as to why it took them. Hi, everyone. How are you? It's Lauren Conlon and Jarrett Barantino. Sorry, did you guys hear that? My YouTube was playing. Am I crazy? You can't hear that, right? When mine's playing?
I didn't hear it.
Okay, good. Okay. Sorry. It felt like it was on a loop and I was like, oh, that's so random. Thank you for joining us. We haven't done a live in a while, but we definitely wanted to jump on and number one, give a recap on what's happening in the pretrial hearings and motions and filings with the Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley case. We have been all over that horrible, horrible case. And I think that a lot of people that I've been talking to, Jarrett, they seem to have some questions about some things that are going on. It is pretty complicated. So I feel like I always have questions and I'm always bothering you. So for the first half of the show, and I'll mark this right now, we are going to be discussing Veronica and Jilian and what's going on with the suspects with that case. And then the second half, we'll talk about the Delphi verdict yesterday, which I know a lot of people are up in arms about, or they're really happy, or, you know. But first, Jarrett, let's discuss, we left off last week where one of the autopsy reports for the women was released. Now, it turns out that it was released on an error. The same day that it was released, which was November 5th, the defense filed a motion wanting to hold all of the autopsy report, or both of the autopsy reports, not knowing that Jilian's was already released. Now, the state had no objection to that. And that came out as well last week. But what also was filed now, and I can pull this up, was a withdrawal of the hearing request for the autopsy reports. So let me pull that up right now, because I think I was slightly confused, which, I mean, I took that as like, okay, now they don't want a hearing because the state agrees with them. But let's pull this up right now. I mean, what can you say without, you know?
Well, so when you first sent this to me, I figured it's moot because one of them got out and the other one was going to get out. So I figured at this point they pulled up stakes and said, what are we fighting for? It's already out. So when I saw what was this request, the name of this request is basically, there's nothing to fight about here because the state agrees. They have no objection to us holding the release of this information. So really the state, so let's look at it. So it's a withdrawal of the request. Okay. And if you look at,
Yep. Tell me if you want me to move forward.
Okay. So right at the last sentence of the first paragraph, it says the state in an email to the court and all parties has written that it has no objection to the court ruling based on the plea. That's number one on that particular issue. If the court rules on the pleadings, it says it could be handled at the next hearing, which is currently scheduled for November 20th. So they're asking, they didn't necessarily withdraw the request. They would do a request for the hearing, which means they were going to have a separate hearing on that particular issue. The state's saying we can deal with this issue together on November 20th. That's really so logistically, to move Tad, Tiffany, and Cole into that courtroom for an issue like the argument over the release of the autopsy reports is a little, it's unnecessary if you have a hearing scheduled for 8 days from now. So they're saying we could address this sooner than later. I'm going to tell you this though. I've been a part of these kinds of cases in the past where the defense is trying to block the public release of something. Okay. So you're weighing the public's right to know versus the prejudicial effect, the sledgehammer prejudicial effect, the release of this information may have on the right to a fair trial for Cole, Tad, and Tiffany. That's the balancing you're doing. as a prosecutor, you do that balancing act, but at the same time, your foremost objective is to protect the integrity of the case. There's no harm in a prosecutor coming in and saying, hey, judge, I agree this autopsy report doesn't need to be released publicly. Or they say, judge, the public has a right to know, but understand wherever you come down on this, where they kind of half-heartedly argue for it. But look, I think the judge ultimately is going to block the release of this for a period of time, but eventually this thing is coming out. Here's the other thing. If they're worried about tainting the jury pool with the horrific nature of the injuries in this case, the jury themselves are going to hear that in that courtroom. Not only are they going to hear it, they're going to see pictures of it. They're going to see diagrams of Veronica and Jilian's injuries. So when you have that, again, it doesn't necessarily say Tad, Cole, and Tiffany did this. It's really only an assessment on the nature of the injuries that were on Veronica and Jilian. So eventually these are going to be released.
Okay, so let me just recap this to make sure I understand as a lay. So, and I was completely incorrect in my thinking here. So they are not withdrawing their actual motion to withhold Veronica's autopsy report. What they are doing is saying, we don't need an extra hearing for this. We can discuss this on the already planned hearing for November 20th.
Yeah, so that's why it's a withdrawal of a request for hearing.
Okay.
And that the judge can decide this issue. Like, everybody feels like, well, we put forth our position in the pleadings. You can rule on this based on the pleadings. We could address it on the November 20th. So, like, it's not something that requires extensive argument. The judge knows the deal. The defense doesn't want it out. They know why the state is okay if it doesn't come out, but isn't really going to take a hard line position on this. Like, this doesn't necessarily, like, the state often finds themselves, like, I would find myself in these arguments where you're like, honestly, like, my deal is to convince these folks and to bring justice in the case. I'm not going to get up there and have a big fight. Like, I would have fights with newspapers and stuff, and I'd be like, this is a total sidetrack from what I got to really do. So I'd come in, I'd toe the party line, and I'd get the hell out of there. I would be like, look, my job is to get Tiffany, Tad, and Cole in this thing. Judge, whatever you want to do with the autopsy reports at this point is fine. But know this, they're coming in for the trial. The jury's going to hear what happened to Jilian and Veronica, and I intend to show it in living color, period. And that's the conversation I would have.
So then why would the defense even request to hold this in the first place? Because everything that you just said makes a ton of sense here. They're going to hear it anyway. It's going to come out anyway. What's the point of holding on to it?
So everything I always say makes a ton of sense. But
okay, got it. All right.
But here's why. Because we both know what would happen if these are released. They're going to be released, analyzed, interpreted, used to point the finger at Tad, Cole, and Tiffany. When you see that, it's the fear of the defense. Like, the defense has to do their job. They have to say, we need to do what we can to level the playing field and try not to prejudice the jury pool against our clients. How do we do that? This is a significant piece of evidence, explosive piece of evidence. Not to get into the details of it, but we're talking about the depth of wounds. We're talking about the nature of a violent death. Inevitably, okay, when people who aren't trained for these kind of things, aren't prepared for these kind of things, hear these kind of things, you inevitably look to blame someone. And you're looking to blame Tad, Cole, and Tiffany sitting in that chair. That's the risk of prejudice that their lawyers are trying to prevent. So they're asking for it to be protected and to be held to allow for the jury pool in Oklahoma to not be prejudiced.
Okay, let me ask you this, Jarrett. So I don't want to say I was happy, but I was relieved to some extent that people did not, when I say people, I guess I mean the news media, they didn't jump on Jilian's autopsy report as clickbait, right? I was very disturbed to my core. I think I had a nightmare about that. And it was actually after I watched one news outlet that did cover it, which was Banfield, with our friend Joe Scott Morgan, who is so gentle and he is very delicate in his approach. However, I still was like, man, I can't imagine being family and listening to that, especially as someone who's not related, heard that. Number one, I've thought about this. They actually said it was an error. They printed that on the filing. Admitting to an error as the state, I mean, that I don't think that helps a case. Or does it not matter? And then you've got this report that came out, which, like I said, if you listen to that, I mean, I know that Oklahoma most likely is not going to pull experts like Joe Scott Morgan, whatever. But any jury that were to hear Joe Scott Morgan talk about that, I cannot imagine they would not be in tears, sobbing so, all of this combined, the release accidentally, and then with the media covering it and really, I don't want to say capitalizing on it, because it's not necessarily they were capitalizing on it, but you know what I'm saying, right? It just kind of didn't feel great.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, the timing of the request to delay the release and actual inadvertent release of the autopsy report is suspicious to me. I mean, it happened on the same day.
Weird.
So
right?
that to me, now your question which is a really good question, is like, what's the consequence to the state now? Like, how do you get out? If it came from the pathologist or the coroner's office, everyone kind of lumps the state together, and the courts do sometimes too. But like, to think there's a separation between that office and the DA's office or the prosecution's office. They're the state one and the same. But look, I mean, they don't work together. They have different staff. They have different budgets. They have different objectives in their work. So could a report have been leaked from that office unbeknownst to a mistake in the DA's office? Sure. But what is the consequence? The report's still going to come in. It's not like if a piece of evidence got out and it was the prosecution office that let that piece of evidence out, and the defense show that it has hampered their ability to get a fair trial, they would request to limit the admissibility or use of that piece of evidence. I don't think that's the case here. First of all, it's a critical piece of evidence. It needs to be shown to the jury.
But that's my problem. The fact that the state actually said that there was an error on their behalf, like, who admits to an error is what I want to know.
Someone who wants to avoid being accused of doing it on purpose, number one. So if you did it on purpose, the consequence could be dire, where they say, and I don't see an autopsy report being suppressed or not let in to be considered. I don't see that happening.
But you see what I'm saying, right? Like, we're taught, I guess maybe it's politics, and this is politics. A DA's office is political. So you're taught to never admit wrongdoing. So when I saw that, I was just like,
but Lauren, you have an obligation of candor toward the court. So you can't, so they know it happened. And then there becomes, like, I was part of a case in my career where sealed documents prior to my involvement became unsealed. Okay. And they were exposed to defense sealed documents, which it was a mistake. There was a procedure that wasn't followed. Okay. So when you do something by mistake versus you intentionally violate a sealed court order, different ball game. I mean, totally different ball game. So the fact that they're coming in and admitting a mistake, they have to account for what happened. Like, how the hell did this get out? And if it was a mistake, it's certainly more understandable than if some bad actor intentionally did it to subvert a delay in being released. That's a problem.
Right. And you don't see that happening. I mean, it's just like the timing is odd. The day that it was released is when the day they filed it. I mean, it's strange. There's no timestamps on it, right? The autopsy report was released earlier in the morning, and this was a bit later. But again, I don't know when. I don't have the stroke of a keyboard.
Or, the other thing that could have happened was it got out and those motions followed. I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to say. maybe somebody knew it got out and it was going to be made public the day before and that motion followed. It's hard to say, but rest assured, and if family and members close to Jilian and Veronica's family and friends are watching, which I know they do, know this, okay? That report, as awful as it is, okay, will find its way into that courtroom, will be used in showing just how horrible Tad, Cole, and Tiffanys' actions were. It will hopefully coincide with the factual evidence that's going to be put forth from Cora and Paul and all of the other forensic evidence. So again, you cannot tell this story of what happened to Jilian and Veronica in a easy way. It's going to be difficult from beginning to end. Looking at their faces healthy and well is hard to look at, knowing what happened to them down the road and that they're forever taken from their friends and family. You know, it's going to be brutal. It's going to be brutal and awful, but I don't believe this release, whether it happens, whether it was inadvertent, is going to impact the prosecution's ability to use it.
Okay. And so I've been thinking about this as well, because I want to ask you just some questions, just as a reminder about the pretrial hearing. But is it possible that there could be a venue change after the pretrial hearing? And I'll get into my thoughts about a venue change, but after the pretrial hearing, is that possible? Like,
yes.
Okay, that's possible.
Yes, here's why. So the big pretrial, I know we've had a lot, so there's the little courthouse, which is your pretrial hearing at the district magistrate level. Mm-hmm. Get up to the big courthouse, okay? You very rarely have a lot of pre-little courthouse litigation. We've had that here, okay? We've had monthly discovery meetings at the big courthouse, all right? So you have more pretrial argument and situations in this case than you typically have. So to answer your question, the request for change of venue, the request for suppression of evidence and all that typically comes after that preliminary hearing. So it is possible that because I'll tell you why. After the preliminary hearing, before trial, you will be getting a schedule, and it says all defense pretrial motions have to be filed on or before this date. Mm-hmm. That date may get extended, but really at that time, that's when, like in Kohlberger, for example, a request for a change of venue is properly made.
And so, and sorry to be dumb, but this is why I'm here. I'm here to answer or ask the questions that, So it's okay that a brand new DA could be put on this case if the venue is changed to a different district.
Well, that wouldn't change the prosecutor. It would change
not the prosecutor.
Where it's heard.
Like, so, for example, so this certain DA, he is the DA across 4 counties, and across these 4 counties, I'd say I looked up just the population the other day. I'd say across all 4, you're hitting like 30,000 people across all 4, roughly, which is still
relatively small.
I was going to say that it actually is the definition of a small town, and that's 4 counties. I'm saying this case, I don't think it should be tried in any of these counties that he presides over. I really don't. So how is that possible to see all of this? And then, I mean, listen, the defense, this is the problem. The defense, in my opinion, is not going to push for another venue. Just saying. So I don't think there's a chance of it, because I don't think.
Then politically speaking, here's how that works. Like, if the defense ain't asking for it, the DA, who's an elected DA, is not going to say the people I represent aren't capable of being fair and calling this case straight, this horrible case in my jurisdiction. You're not going to get that request from a DA. It's going to come from the defense. And it's going to be that. So the change would be the location of the trial, physical location of the trial, be moved out of 4-county footprint, or the jurors be brought in from outside those counties. So that's really, and again, not to go back to Kohlberger, what happened here, that trial was moved significantly farther away from the original. So in our situation here in Oklahoma, So you're doubtful that the defense would raise these requests?
I'm very doubtful of that. Correct. I think that maybe they would push for maybe a jury, but I think that because it's so small, I mean, I was looking up the judge, and the judge, Clark Jett, he's been, they've been around for decades trying civil cases across these 4 counties. So it's kind of like they all know each other. I'm sure the suspects are familiar with everybody that's prosecuting them. I hate to say it, but it's just like I felt kind of like I guess I need to do a little bit more research on these small town cases. This just happens to be so big and so important. I don't think it can be bucketed into this small town stuff, It's not fair. It's just not, and when I say it's not fair to the families, I guess. I'm sick of that.
Well, I mean, it's funny you use the word fair, because fair is the standard. It's got to be fair for the defendants, and it's quite honestly got to be fair for the victims and their families and the survivors that go on now. So, look, I get it. Small town politics is concerning. I prosecuted in a county that had approximately 360,000 people. Okay, the Wilkes-Barre area, the northeastern Pennsylvania, and yet a lot of people knew one another, and we would see the same defendants, and we would see people from the civil realm come into the criminal realm and vice versa. The question isn't whether or not you know these folks. The question is, does the fact that you know these folks create an impediment to your ability to have a fair and impartial criminal proceeding? That's really what the question is. You may not know that until you make attempts to do it. You may not know until you get into that courtroom and you're trying to pick jurors, and you would say, Tad was I bought my meat off Tad. That's a problem.
Exactly.
So once we start encountering those, I'll tell you what, like this Penn State had the Jerry Sandusky case. Okay. State College is literally named after the school, and Jerry Sandusky was a god there. Mm-hmm. That case was tried in State College. So and you could not, and he was convicted. You couldn't imagine, obviously a little bit different of a situation, but you have a horrible crime, okay, in an area where everyone, not only was the college connected to everyone, it was a major employer. If you didn't work there, you were a fan, you had some connection. So it's hard to say, Lauren, until we get into the courtroom, try to see the jury, whether or not that's going to be a hindrance.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. And this, honestly, I have to remind myself of this a lot with this case, is that the OSBI is in charge of the case, of the investigation, which is still ongoing. But the DA has final say, right? When it comes to, or the judge, I'm sorry, the judge has final say. The DA, makes his recommendation based on what the OSBI puts forth, I'm assuming, for certain motions and whatnot. So I think that I can feel better, and hopefully the families can feel better, that truly nobody local is running the investigation, if that makes sense, right? It's like it is.
Well, they would have a local counter. So typically the way these works is there's an investigator in the DA's office that would be key to the investigation, okay? And that would be working with OSBI. That's typically how that works. So there's and again, the DA runs the case. The DA, once the charges are filed, and even before that often, the DA has a great deal of power over the course of the investigation, the language in warrants, the certain evidence. So it's a joint effort. Certainly you can't have one without the other, that's for sure. So OSBI obviously is bigger than the DA's office in particular. They have a bigger reach. That's a bigger operation. But at the end of the day, the DA really is the quarterback.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't love that at all, but I guess we will see. Like I said, I've been just looking into some of this small town stuff, and I don't like it. I really don't like it. One of the counties, Cimarron County, it's only 2,000 people, Jarrett. My high school was 2,000 people. it gives me just a bit of anxiety, I guess. But again, I do have faith in the system. I have faith in the OSBI, and I have faith that the pretrial hearing, which, and we will remind everybody, this is where the prosecution puts forth pretty much everything they have to, and you'll obviously speak to this much better than I'm speaking to it, but to show them that they have a case. They have a kidnapping, murder, unlawful desecration, child neglect. They have these charges. They are warranted. They are valid, and they can put this case forward. And you and I have speculated that we believe Paul Grice and Cora, not because they feel bad, not because they feel guilty, but because they don't want this trial. Maybe they don't want to put their families through a trial. Maybe they want to keep their lives, and this is a way that death penalty will be off the table, that they have flipped and are working with the state. So that's our speculation. Who knows? But Jarrett, can you just go over what we most likely will see in December? I believe the pretrial hearing is Monday, December 17th. What do you think the state is going to present at that point?
So basically, that preliminary hearing is a mini trial. Okay. First, let me say this, and I get your concern about the DA's office. They have done so far what we were hoping to see, which was get one or flip. They have provided all the discovery. They've done a great job of tying, those weeks before actions where Tiffanys procuring a stun gun and the yellow straps and all that stuff. Like the affidavit was written very well, solid. I like what I see happening thus far. Okay. I do. I have to say, I feel like the DA is doing a really good job, writing well, arguing well, all of the things that I anticipate and would be doing. And I mean, I only know based on my own experience what should be done, and I'm seeing that. So I'm not seeing anybody having a reason to be concerned, at least on paper, okay? And I don't know any of these folks. What to expect at the preliminary hearing mini trial? Will you see Paul? Will you see Cora? I don't know. That is really up to the DA. They can bring in, you're going to hear about the excavation. You may hear from Jamie Beasley. You may hear from an investigator about the cell phone. You may hear about the discovery of the car. Yeah. You may hear Paul or Cora, or Paul and Cora, or neither. Okay. The DA really, your standard is lower. And you may say, like, why wouldn't you put up the goods and have them at that level?
Yeah.
And the thought process is, for me personally, I would put one or both of them on to, number one, lock in their testimony. Okay. To show the world what we have here. And it's a compelling case. Certainly, this is an eyewitness who was part of this. I would probably use Paul. He came first. And Paul's role, from what I'm reading here, was very significant, very hands-on. Leave it at that. So it's important to put him on. So you're going to have a mini trial. And you may say to yourself, hey, it only took 2 days. It doesn't seem like they have a lot. You have an eyewitness and the investigators, and you talk about the excavation. You may talk about, you're not going to have a lot of victim impact stuff or things of that nature. It's literally a mini trial.
Facts, right? So, it's just facts.
Right. And it's lower standard. It's prima facie. Basically, the standard here is not beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. And this isn't just legal speak. This has impact.
Yeah.
Your standard is, it is more likely than not, number one, a crime has been committed. Clearly, a crime has been committed with Jilian and Veronica. And two, that these folks are more likely than not the folks that committed it. That's the standard in layman's terms. And the way to do that is, you're probably going to have some autopsy testimony too, though. I always call the coroner.
The defense, just so I know this, the defense is not required really to do anything. They're not required to bring any experts in for this, but all they can really do is cross-examine whoever is on the stand.
Right. And even that's limited. Like, if they would get into, one of the things that would start to happen is the defense. Now, these folks have a lot of the discovery. Oftentimes you wouldn't have that yet. So you start, like, defense lawyers who like an investigation, I'd look over and be like, yo, we're not here for that. Like, I'm not sitting here so you conduct this investigation, and the judge would shut it down. You don't have that here. So you're going to have, here's the other thing though. If I use Paul or I use Cora at that hearing, I let the defense examine them as much as they want. In fact, I give them, I know Paul has a prior record, so I'd give them Paul's whole record and Cora's if she has one. And I give them, under the law, a full and fair opportunity to cross-examine those two witnesses in particular. Because if Paul or Cora are struck by a bolt of lightning or shanked in the prison yard, okay, if that testimony was extensive and the cross-examining was extensive, that testimony could be used in the event of death or ultimate unavailability for trial. And believe me, I've had it.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this as well. That is super helpful in terms of pretrial. How will it be possible? You know, we've already seen, and what we believe is Paul and Cora flipping on, you know, their three alleged partners here. I firmly believe that Tiffany is going to flip on Tad and Cole, because Tiffany, you know, allegedly she ordered these murders, and but she could argue that she did not do it so viciously, or she could say, well, I didn't ask Tad to do it that way. I didn't, you know. Do you feel like she'll be able to do that if they are all tried together? How does that work? I guess, how are they able to flip on each other? I mean, I don't know that they are, but I'm just thinking about this at this point. It's so horrible, and there's so much evidence that we've seen, the public has seen, that they don't have a defense. None of them have a defense.
Well, again, I've had people confess to the actual murder and take a trial. So they'll, you know, when there's life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. But here's the thing. So if your question is, if these folks start pointing the finger at one another, okay, their defenses become what the law calls hostile defenses. And we talked about this. So we say first, and then there were three. We're down to three. Okay. And if Tad and Tiffany part company for whatever reason, if she says Tad did this on his own, something of that nature, then the trials could potentially be severed. It's much more tenable dealing with these three than all five. But again, I don't see that happening, though. I think that they're going to have, I don't know. We're going to be able to tell based on the pretrial filings. But yes, if they do start turning on one another, the likelihood of them being tried together becomes less likely. And it all depends actually on what they're saying.
That's what I was thinking. Again, at this point, now that Tiffany has those child neglect charges, I feel like her one defense, which she was going to pretend like, or sorry, I shouldn't say pretend, but she was going to say that she was doing it for the kids. Who knows? Whatever. I just feel like that's done with the child neglect charges. So I just don't see how any of them have a defense. I don't know what the hell your defense could be unless you whip out the fact that you're crazy, you were on drugs. I don't know. Is that even a defense, Jarrett? Oh, I was on meth. I don't know. Is that a defense?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, certainly a mental state to negate some kind of intent. These guys, look, they're boxed into a corner here.
That's what I think too.
They have very little room to work. But here's the defense then. Test the integrity of the investigation. Try to knock out as much forensic evidence as you can. Attack the credibility of the witnesses that come in. I mean, they're not going to fall over here. You know, if they take a trial, there's something. You know, was it me? I don't know. Good luck with that in this scenario. And Tiffany coming in and saying, I mean, when you're buying the yellow straps and you're buying the stun guns that were used, good luck selling that one.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I want to open things up. If anyone in the chat has questions for Jarrett, we did say he would answer them to the best of his ability. This is not legal advice. He is not connected with this case, but he can explain things in his opinion and his experience. So before we move on to Delphi, let us know if you have questions. I'll hang for a second. But I do feel better after speaking with you. But Forrest, I agree with you. What they did, it was obvious. It was, like you said, from day one, we knew the deal. We knew what was going on.
Well, for us, day one, there was an anvil plan, if everybody knows. There were the nature, I mean, ultimately bringing about murder was in the cards. Death was in the cards. It's just a matter of how that had evolved over time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let me just make sure. Did anyone? All right. I don't think there's any questions. So we will, the hammer too. And, Afton, I think I said this in the last video. I just think something went very wrong with their plan, or else they wouldn't have left the crime scene like that. They wouldn't have left the crime scene with blood. They wouldn't have left the car on the side like that. They wouldn't have made that spectacle if things went according to their plan. I really do believe that Veronica and Jilian are tough as hell. And they were like, oh, hell no. So it makes me really sad and very disturbed. But
when you're talking about daylight, you're talking about his adrenaline is going. That's how things get left behind. I mean, the murder scenes and kidnapping scenes get sloppy.
Yeah, and the anvil thing is so stupid. Anvil, they don't get thrown. That's like, whatever. Really stupid. But
nobody accused the crew of being brain surgeons. That's for sure.
Yes, that is correct. All right. Well, let's go to the Delphi verdict, to Richard Allen being found guilty on all counts. I know there are quite a few feelings about this verdict from a number of people. I guess I didn't know I guess there's a lot of drama with YouTube and people covering the case. I didn't really know until last Friday. I tried to kind of figure out what was going on. I think that I just have to think, Jarrett, that it was Richard Allen's own words that got him convicted. But
so I've gone on record in this case. I've been looking at Delphi last year. If folks have CW app, or I think we're on Hulu too, but they did a special on the Delphi murder, and I was part of that. Being a part of that, I really dug into this case and broke down the prosecution. And on that special, and on times we've covered it, my assessment against the case against Richard Allen was that it was weak, and the ability of the defense to blame Ron Logan, Keegan Klein, or Odinism was going to be a significant distraction in that courtroom, but something they were going to pursue pretty aggressively. At that time, when Richard Allen was arrested, the sole link, other than the fact the size, shape, and has the same clothes as Bridge Guy, which is a huge piece of evidence, and admitted he was there, was that bullet that was cycled through his firearm. Powerful pieces of evidence.
That was found in between Abby and Libby. And and how else did it get there? I guess what would be the answer to that? And I'm genuinely
unless somebody
challenging.
Unless you can knock that out as junk science or something, okay, and say that it's not really a match, okay. But you also had Ron Logan, who lived up there, who lied about whereabouts in the immediate investigation because he claimed he went to go buy koi fish or something that day, but he was out driving in violation of his DUI probation, something like that. You also had a former romantic of his come forward and say he's violent, he's an abuser, things of that nature. And I'm not saying that, but there was a person that came forward, and she was in that special. So anyway,
can you talk about this? What Afton wrote? Because she said, I'm not convinced by the bullet that the match didn't occur under the same circumstances.
Well, again, I don't know necessarily. I mean, I'm not a ballistics expert, only to say that the bullet was not fired through the gun. It was cycled through. But here's the thing. When you take that piece of evidence, Richard Allen, size and shape, his admission that he was on, not his confession, we didn't even get there yet, that he was on the Monon Bridge between 1:30 and 3:30 that day, that coupled with the video from Libby's phone, you have all of this together, and it is a powerful case against Richard Allen, but not the strongest case ever until he makes those confessions. Now I could sit here and say I was the second gunman on the grassy knoll, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm 46 years old. I wasn't alive then. Okay. I can't just confess to crimes. You have to have corpus delicti, which is the body of the crime. You take those pieces of evidence I just gave you against Richard Allen, add to them his statements that came later. He's arrested in October of 22. In April of 22, he starts making the first documented confessions are to his wife, to his mother, to his psychiatrist, to his prison counselor. Significant and multiple inculpatory statements where he's admitting his role, discussing details of the case. He's showing remorse. He is appearing to be of sound mind. Now, the defense is trying to knock those out by saying this is a man who was acting so erratic, had been kept under torturous conditions, and then made these statements. I get it. But he's also the same man who has all those significant pieces of evidence pointing the finger at him. He's also the same man who expressed remorse. He expressed certain factual information that only the killer would know. All of those things taken together were very powerful for that jury. You know, they were out 19 hours. The trial was 17 days, so that's not that uncommon. But as Forrest, was it Forrest that asked about the bullet? I think they had some of those.
Well, Afton said they couldn't match. She said they couldn't match the casings without firing a bullet. To me, that's not a match.
And again, match is a term of art. So when they say match or consistent, like every DNA expert I've ever questioned, inevitably when you're prepping them for trial, for example, and you would say, oh, it's a match. And they always tell you, not a match, it's consistent. So again, I don't know. I'm not saying I shouldn't say the bullet matched. There was consistencies, and so much so it was supported by an expert. You know, whether or not that was what alone what carried the day, I don't know.
Well, and for the people, you know, in the chat who really, I don't know if you believe that he's innocent. I don't know if you, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, do you feel like he just did not get a fair trial? And that's what's upsetting. Like the fact that his defense wasn't allowed in, the defense of Otism, because Jarrett, you know, you've said this, like as a prosecutor, you're like, yeah, just lay it on.
I've been very bothered by the fact. So I think, from what I've read and seen, Judge Gold ran a great trial. My concern was, and what will continue to haunt Delphi, let's say this, I wish it all came in because I think this jury would have seen right through it. Okay. I wish some of the Odinism stuff or the ability to blame Ron Logan came in, because I think the prosecution was more than prepared to deal with it. Now, Richard Allen's wife walks out of the courtroom and says, this is not over. Mm-hmm. They're going to appeal this. She believes he's innocent, and fine, she has a right to support her husband. But the reality is it's not the strongest issue on appeal, but I'd not have it. I would really rather not have it. You know, I've been critical of that because I think I've had some pretty outrageous defenses raised in cases, but they can't then say they didn't have the ability to defend their client. And one of the folks I heard, I think it was Mac, who was talking to Nancy Grace and our friend Cheryl and our friend Nancy, and he said, was it a strategy of the defense not to put these things forward to create some kind of ineffective assistance of counsel claim? I would not think that was the case. I think that Brad Rossi and his team wanted to get all this stuff in. They fought like hell to get this stuff in. And the fact of the matter is, strategically, they couldn't. And under the law, they didn't. So I don't know that anybody would intentionally be ineffective, get the conviction, and try to litigate that late. And that you're really in a bad spot at that point.
Yeah. I just don't, I feel horrible about this case in particular because people really do feel so strongly on both sides about it. And you know, it's like when it's two little girls, it's almost like I don't know. I thought about this, and I guess I don't have evidence of this. I don't have proof, but like, could it be that Richard Allen is guilty, but someone else is guilty as well? There was someone, I don't know. Am I crazy to even?
I mean, like this setup of Richard Allen, here's the other thing. If the prosecution and the investigators just wanted to close the Delphi case. Okay. Ron Logan was dead. Could have framed Ron Logan. I mean, if you're going to frame the guy, you don't have to prosecute. It's like that. This whole framing stuff. I'm sorry. Brian Kohlberger wasn't framed and Richard Allen wasn't framed. I've been doing it a long time. That's a fantasy. All right. Because a lot of things
family would want someone alive. Like, I'm not saying that.
Here's the thing. They're just like, it's easy to sit and speculate, but knowing the obligations and what happens behind the scenes as these things are built, like if the motivation was everybody involved in the 7 years of this investigation, particularly the first 5 years, right? Two bridge guys, this and that. Okay. They then get together and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pin it on this guy that works at CVS, right? Yeah. Bring him in, get a bullet, try to match it up. Oh, by the way, he happened to be on the bridge that day, right? He happened to have those articles of clothing. He then later confesses to doing the very act, okay? Doesn't help himself. What's the motivation of the prosecution there? Just find somebody? If you're looking to just find somebody and end this investigation, blame the dead guy who owns the property.
Right.
You close it right there. We believe it was Ron Logan. Why? I mean, it just, to me.
I think this is what Afton said, and this helps me understand, I think, where a lot of people are coming from who feel strongly. She doesn't think he was framed. She thinks there was a massive incompetence and an attempt to hide it, more like a perfect storm than a conspiracy. And maybe they got the right guy. I hope so.
Good point, Afton. That's well said. And I think maybe I'm oversimplifying the concern. That's a good point. That there was incompetent, look, and I think Rozzi did a good job of like beating up on the bungled evidence and things of that nature in this case. My gut is they got the right guy and they put on the evidence they had and a jury saw it that way. Where I am disappointed in this trial is I feel like going in, we have reviewed that Keegan Kline was the guy who may have been corresponding with me, I believe. And eventually went down for child pornography and things of that nature. Logan obviously owned the property, and then the Odinism theories that had come out. I had long believed they were going to point the finger at another phantom bad guy in that court. They lost the ability to do that. Despite repeatedly asking for it.
Right. I also heard, and I was not aware of this, maybe people in the chat will be more aware. There apparently was harassment of family members. And I didn't know that. I think that if that's the case, then that's pretty bad. That's pretty unspeakable.
Of Abby and Libby's family, you mean?
Yeah, that's what I heard, but I didn't see it myself. I didn't see it with my own eyes. I have no idea. But I just was like, how do these trials just get, I mean, these are.
What do they have to do? Like, they're not the ones who picked Richard Allen out.
I don't know. I will say I did do some digging. Yeah, I'm not going to post that. But somebody in the chat just blamed a family member. And I was like, where does this even come from? And it's just beyond, it's bonkers. It's like, I don't know. I think there's a fine line at this point. And I think that a lot of people that pay attention or are highly just involved in the Karen Reed trial, I guess they draw parallels between the harassment of the O'Keefe family. But I think, for this one, I'm not saying one is worse than the other per se, but like, it's two little girls. I just feel like that's like, I don't know.
This is a whole different situation. And it
is a different situation.
There's that closeness. I mean, the victims in Karen Reed trial know Karen Reed intimately. Abby and Libby's families, like, these are simple folks. They were being raised by one. I think it was Libby was being raised by her grandparents. Like these are simple folks. They didn't pick Richard Allen out of a lineup here.
And I don't, like I said, I didn't really get to, and I just kind of was looking into some of the dramatic stuff and some of the outside noise over the weekend. And I was pretty surprised. I was like,
well, we shared some of the drama that went on. I get it. People get emotional about these things. Focus your efforts on, if you truly believe Richard Allen is not guilty. I mean, look at focus your efforts on the merits of the investigation, not these, and I think the word conspiracy theory gets overused, certainly.
Yeah.
And I think Afton put it that very well. I think that if you have concerns as to whether or not the DA met their burden or an investigation left something to be desired, that's a different conversation. And I get it. That happens.
I think that
happens.
is what
I'm not being naive here.
I think that's where people are stuck. They believe that the prosecution did not meet the burden, and this is from what I've read from people like reading their opinions and stuff. They believe the prosecution did not meet their burden. They believed that the judge made some poor calls on things like not allowing his defense in. I believe something about that witness, Brad, what's his face? I always forget.
That's his name, Brad. What's his face?
Yeah, I brought this up last time, but yeah. So I just feel like in a case like this,
I get it, and I'm going to tell. I'm on record. My assessment of this case was that it's weak. It was weak, and then when I heard Alan's confessions, I'm like,
"Thank you, sorry,
clever." But I mean, you can't as a prosecutor, you don't want to wait till your confesses after you've charged them. I mean, it's fortunate he did that, but absent those, I had concerns for this prosecution. I did. And it was going to be tough to pin him to just a bullet, no DNA. They got his phones. They didn't get the phone that he had at that time. Ironically, that one was gone. But there were some holes in this prosecution and legitimate third-party suspect that you could have tried to pin it on.
So in your opinion, what are the chances that he would actually, if he appeals and he is actually granted a new trial? I mean,
it's an evidentiary ruling. So again, we talked abuse of discretion standard. Mm-hmm. I think that, I don't know. I wish she let it in. I think it's better than 50-50. Her rulings will be upheld and that he doesn't get a new trial. But stranger things have happened. But inevitably, I think even if there was a new trial, you can't get around those confessions. What was that? I missed that. I missed it.
Oh, sorry. She was saying Sue watched updates from attorneys who were in the courtroom daily, and they all, the ones she watched, agreed the state did not prove their case.
Are these all defense lawyers, Sue? If you get a lawyer to all agree.
You probably watched Bob and you watched Andrea, I feel like. I think they were both in the courtroom. And yeah, so Afton said it wouldn't matter. It would go back to Gull. So another reason why people don't believe he will get a new trial. Or Lawyer Lee. Okay.
Well, but again, if a court overturned Judge Gull's decision, let's say they said, Odin, for example, Odinism should come in, right? Mm-hmm. So an appeals court would say, we believe that there was sufficient evidence to allow the occult testimony in. Mm-hmm. We defer back to the trial court for a trial in keeping with this decision. So basically, they overturn the suppression, and now you go to trial with that ultimate decision, or ask Judge Gull to reconsider, and she has to issue another opinion. So it all depends. I mean, anything could happen, but again, those confessions are very powerful. I know this gets a lot of people charged up, but I'm not. I respect colleagues that felt differently, that they didn't prove their case in there. The jury believed differently. Right.
Again, it's hard. I like to watch the trials myself. It's really difficult to go off of just news articles and what other people say. I think it's important to watch everybody and all opinions, which is what I try to do for
what I used to do. I used to ask the deputies in the courtrooms when my juries went out. I probably should have never done it because sometimes they were wrong, but I would ask these folks that are kind of now they're kind of law enforcement, but I would say, what do you think? What are the issues? And whatever they said, I would just be in my own private hell then over the whole while the jury's out. But you kind of find folks that don't have a dog in the fight. If lawyers are in there and like Sue said, these folks agree, maybe their background is in defense and they're just used to knocking the hell out of what the state's putting forth. if they're calling it straight and they're being objective, great, and they see it one way. It's hard to sit in a courtroom as a lawyer to watch other lawyers do their thing. Like I would climb the walls in there to not be the prosecutor or a defense lawyer. So,
right.
But again, I mean, everybody sees this a different way. The only opinion that matters are the opinions of those 12 people in that courtroom.
Right. Exactly.
As far as Richard Allen goes, not to say that their opinions aren't worth considering, but the folks that needed to make the decision to call after 19 hours.
And Afton says, did the judge allowing deliberations to start right away affect what weight they gave evidence?
I wouldn't think so, because they had a lot of time to think about everything. It wasn't like it was a rushed verdict. They were out for 19 hours. So,
and they deliberated over the weekend too, right?
Yeah,
so,
I wouldn't think so.
Did they deliberate over the weekend? No.
They came in on, I don't know. I thought there was some talk about them coming in on Saturday, but it was a total of 9 hours. I know that. And then Susan Hendricks was there, and she was fully expecting a mistrial on Monday. And she said, not because she didn't think that they proved their case, just because deliberation had gone on. I would tell you, though, a couple of things, some inside baseball. Like, I would deliver the closing argument, and if they didn't come back fast, I would get nervous. I'd be like, because I'm all charged up. I give this impassioned argument, and I go in there and do what you need to do here. And like, longer it was out, I was like, oh man, they're not thinking about what I said now. Now they're, and then in the days after a trial like this, you go through this, I don't know if it's like a depression, but you just totally, like, you're exhausted. You're physically exhausted. You, world is like, was so laser focused that when you go home, I used to have a theater in the basement of our old house. I would just kind of sit down there for like a day just to get my bearings, like go for a run the day after, sit in that theater and like watch a classic movie or something and just kind of get my head about, like, I expected to win. I expected victory, and I enjoyed victories, but the fight was really so crazy all the time and so wild and just so in the moment. When it was over, it let down. And you had to reacclimate your body and your mind back to being a dad and back to being a regular lawyer again, and out of the papers for a couple of days. And it was an adjustment. And I think all these folks are going through that process, families on both sides. And really, when you're in that world, it's wild. It is wild.
Yeah, I hope that the family has a little bit of peace. I know that it must not help a lot, but it must help a little bit, if anything. I would imagine that a verdict like this helps more than a not guilty verdict. But yeah, just I think about them, and I just think about the life that those poor girls, Abby and Libby, missed out on. But yeah, I hope that I guess for now they have peace. And it's such a tough place, I guess, between, like, you do want everyone to get a fair trial. This is the United States, but you're also human. You have feelings and you feel for this family, and you don't want them to have to go through this all over again. But then again, sometimes you can put yourself in the position of a defendant and say, oh my gosh, what if that was me? But then again, it's like, what if you put yourself in the position of the family? What if that was you? So it's so hard, Jarrett. It's like, it's just not black and white. It's not.
I used to always say to families, like, if it's not fair for them, if it's not fair for the defendant, then we're going to have to do it. We got to get this person the right way. And you got to understand, like, let us do our thing. And I spent, hundreds and hundreds of families over my career. Some were tough, some were passive, some were angry, all were heartbroken. And my approach was always, I was often criticized for holding the hands of victims' families and stuff. And I'm an emotional person, and a lot of people have different approaches to this. But for me, if I didn't care, how was I going to get a jury to care? And if care for them. And then we've had cases where there were no families. Some gangbanger gets shot in the street from out of state. Nobody's in there watching the trial. So you have to get them to care, But I would say this. even Richard Allen's family was on a roller coaster ride. I mean, you got to imagine, like, Kathy, his wife, didn't know she'd be getting into this kind of thing. I would hope, like, you can't paint everyone with the same brush to avoid the temptation to do that. And I know she's saying things and he's trying to defend him at this point. But again, everybody suffers on the family side.
Totally agree. Well, all right. So I'm going to cut this off at an hour just because I have to jump to another meeting, but thank you for explaining all of the Oklahoma, Kansas pretrial stuff in a way that I am now feeling better about. I have a better understanding of everything, and I'm glad that we could have this discussion about the verdict. So, guys, we will be doing our show tomorrow. It'll roll out at 5 o'clock. We've been doing this premiere, and I've kind of been popping into the chat, which I think is fun. So thank you guys for joining and for being here and participating. We appreciate all of you. Thank you, Taryn, Sheila, Sue. It's always good to see you guys. Afton, Forrest, you guys are the best.
Tell everybody, if you like the show, promote it on your social media too. I really appreciate it. Not that I'm good at that. I just repost what Lauren posts. But
that's okay.
Do.
They actually do. You're talking to the people that actually do promote it for us. Sheila totally retweeted right before, so she's the best. All right. Thanks, guys.
Happening, you're trying to figure out ultimately what is.
It's still a mystery as to why it took them